come on over. All right, hi everyone. I'm Toluca from Markers and Minions.
I'm Jenna, also, or just a sidekick.
My content manager, community manager. So today we're going to talk about how to break down the benchmark assessments because we've been seeing a lot of posts lately basically just talking about how they are not useful. Either they're too long or they just go right over the kids' heads, or you feel like you can't get accurate data from them, or they're assessing end of year standards and you're like, but wait, I only taught these standards. So things like that. We're going to talk about like how I broke them down and used them so that they were more valuable for me as a teacher, and some strategies that I use so that my students could understand the assessments better and make connections to them, and then how to use the interim assessments. So these are these additional long assessments that are different from your weekly and unit tests, and I personally liked using them to track student data and growth over time. So I will show you like where to find those, and then Jenna made posters out of one of them. We'll go over a couple of the questions together, and it's not necessary for you to like print yours out and follow along or anything, and it's going to be hard to even like see what we have here, but you'll get to see the strategy and hopefully be able to use these strategies with your grade level and your interim assessment. So
and we know there's an answer key. A couple of people have said that. There is an answer key. We know that, but we just felt from a teacher standpoint, having the students understand each standard and just like taking ownership of that standard just proved to show in their data.
Yeah, so what we'll be doing is basically going through each question with you as if you are our class, and we're going to be going through like the key words, and then we're going to connect it to a standard, and we're going to say, hey, this is RI 3.3 or whatever, and that's this standard, and that's, remember when we were learning about this in class, we made a chart for this, or you did something with your partner for this, and so you make those connections for the students. But before we dive into that, let's talk about a couple of other like strategies that I used for just the regular weekly and unit assessments. So I always like to share that in the beginning of the year, I used the Unit 1 assessments as a teaching tool. I would read everything to the students, the passage, the test questions, the test answer choices, and then I would model how to, eliminate some questions, model going back to the text and annotating the text to find that answer. And so for Unit 1, there was no student data. It was all me walking them through it. But it proved to be useful as the year went on because they need help. They need a scaffold. And then you slowly remove that scaffold. So in Unit 2, I would read everything, but then I wouldn't give them the answer choices. I wouldn't give them the answers. And then Unit 3, you can kind of release a little more. But I also I always had to read to at least probably a third of my class for their accommodations. But I slowly removed that scaffold for the rest of the kids. And so in the beginning of the year, what I personally used at my school was SRI data. I think that was it. So they'd get their reading level or Lexile level and Lexia. So I took other things and found data for that, and then I just explained to the parents like, your kid, we were standards based too, like your student is going to be around a 2, which is showing progress, and that's nothing to be angry about or ashamed about. As the year progresses and we cover these standards and we assess these standards, you'll see that 2 turn into a 3, maybe turn into a 4, But I kind of worked with parents and made sure that there was that understanding at home as well, so that the tests were not like these horribly stressful things for anybody, really. Yeah. So that was the scaffolding I did in the beginning. As far as making time, my weekly assessments, those are the shorter ones. Those are easier to make time for. So I would always do those on Fridays. Sometimes I would do it first thing in the morning on Fridays. Sometimes I do it in the afternoon. Sometimes I do it in my ELA, during my ELA block. if we had time. For me in the California edition, that was always my lesson 14 on that day, where we would compare two texts or compare characters from two texts or something like that. If I had time, I'd do it either before or right after that. As far as the really long unit assessment, I would give that over the course of a 4th week. Whether or not you're extending your unit to 4 weeks, you can still use that 4th week to administer the long unit assessment. So, for example, let's talk about like if we were going to extend the unit, that 4th week, you'd be doing your projects. You would be, towards the end of the week, introducing your next unit with a cool chart or some sort of inquiry. And you could give the assessment each morning, like pieces of it, okay? If you're not extending your unit to 4 weeks, you're like, yeah, we're done, we're moving on. Fine, start, your next unit, but then make time, maybe in the afternoons, a couple minutes here or there, to do 4 or 5 questions. And then also feel free to like remove some of it. Sometimes I took out the performance task where they had to write, because I'm like, we're already working on a writing unit together, or I have enough writing right now going on. I don't need them to be assessed on that, or I don't feel like grading that.
The blue file, the recycling bin.
Yeah, like we'll just remove that page from the assessment. So sometimes I would take some of that out as well. So that's how we, made time for them. What else? What else was I going to talk about? I guess let's go into the strategy of making the connections. Yeah.
So we are using the 3rd grade 2nd interim.
Oh yeah, we have to talk about what those are, huh?
So we're using the 3rd grade 2nd interim assessment for this, just for the sake of our classroom right now. But I don't know if you want to talk about how to find them or just...
Yeah, so there are 4 interim assessments. They're going to be in your formal assessments handbook. It's like interim and formal assessment handbook. I think that's what it's called. Or you go onto Benchmark Universe and click on assessments, and you can print them off of there. There's also the answer key. So yeah, like you're gonna know what standard each question is assessing, but bear with me. So the interim 1 and interim 4 are the exact same test. You give interim 1 in the beginning of the school year, first couple days, and you tell your kids, look guys, I'm going to give this to you at the end of the year again. We haven't learned any of this. Just do your best. And it's going to be a really cool thing because we'll be able to track your growth over the year. And I'm not even going to tell you what your score is yet. Just at the end of the year, we'll look at your 2 scores and we'll see how much you grew. So that's kind of how I frame it for the kids for interim 1. And then interim 2, this test, is typically done after unit 3. So it's going to assess units 1 through 3, what you've covered so far. So for us, we would give that around November. And then interim 3 is after unit 6. And then interim 4, like I said, is the same as interim 1. And it's supposedly covering all the grade level standards. Okay? Allison says, do you know how to edit the online assessment? No, I was never able to edit the online assessments, and I don't know if that's a feature that's available now. I don't think so. Sorry, girl. All right.
So we're going to get started.
Yeah.
So we are using
So sorry. I was wondering if that was going to happen.
Like
I have a bunch of balloons because we had like a balloon tower for the kids for Halloween, and they might pop during this video. I'm so sorry. My dog's probably having a hard time too.
So we're using the literature text first. We're going to do the informational second, but the story is Armadillo Sings, and it's a Native American folktale. So in the folktale, the armadillo wants to. So that's the first question. So it's kind of making them think what the whole story, and it's a short passage, but what is the armadillo wanting to do? And it's kind of a right there question. I mean, they don't really have to go back to the text, but the standard, which is the central message. So what is the central message? What is he trying to do the whole time? So for standards purposes, that's RL 3.2, and then it's also includes RL 3.3, which is like, why is he acting or feeling a certain way? So I'm going to write that on here.
And this is literally what I would do with the kids. So I always had my standards posted. The kids knew what they were in like really kid-friendly language. So we'd be like, okay, 3.2 is the lesson, 3.3 is motive, character motive. So then what I would do is I would say, oh, let's underline wants to. In the folktale, Armadillo wants to. What's another word for when a character wants something? And then my kids think back to Unit 2 when we did the character anchor chart and they say motives. So then we write motive. Say, oh, okay. So that is going to be 3.3. So that directly relates to Unit 2. Remember when we learned about King Midas and we read Snow White and Cinderella, and they're like, oh yeah, and we talked about what they wanted in the end, and we talked about the lessons they learned too. So that's also 3.2. And then they would kind of just in that moment take a second to make the connection to remember, oh yeah, we did learn this. It's not just some arbitrary test question.
Right. And so I guess just bringing it back to when you're doing this in your classroom, you have this printed and the students are also going through this with you, correct?
Yeah, I would just do this before the test,
right,
before they take it. So at this point, this is an interim. I'm not giving them the answers. I'm not modeling how to take the test. I'm literally just breaking it down with them. And yes, I'm reading the questions to them.
But not the day of the test. Just like that. Yeah.
Well, no, the day of the test.
A little bit, like 30 minutes before.
Yeah. But I'm not reading them the passage. I'm not going through the answer choices. Just with this strategy, I'm just going through and being like, okay, this was from Unit 2. That was the standard. Okay, that. So I'm just going through it quickly because I want them to tune in.
Yeah, think of where they learned that and like the standard connection.
Yeah.
So the next question is, which sentence from the story uses a simile? So for me, I see obviously the word simile like jumps out at me from the teacher's perspective, and I think the students would also see that and think figurative language, like that's what we're supposed to be learning about. Mm-hmm. So from a figurative language, that's RL 3.4. So I would probably write
figurative language, and then I would also say, like, remember the figurative language that we encountered when we were reading, Cinderella. I remember one of the examples, like she toils around the clock or something like that. Yeah. So I would just make a little connection that way.
Yeah, it's a simile. So like or as. We probably shouldn't say that if they're taking this test right after. So
yeah, I would just have them recall that like we've learned about figurative language, and that's another one from Unit 2.
So question number 3, read this sentence from the story. Haha, the birds sang out selfishly. What does this sentence tell you about the birds? So we're thinking about their feelings, or like how it's making us feel. But I guess they use the word tell instead of feel. So bird, and it's also focusing on the birds. So we're not thinking about, in this case, the armadillo. We're thinking about like how are the birds making us feel.
Yeah, so we're talking about the bird's character, right?
Yes.
So
traits, motivations, feelings. So that's RL 3.3.
Yeah. And after like doing this every week, you will remember the standards. The kids will remember the standards. There's less than 10 for literature, less than 10 for informational. There's really 10, but number 10 doesn't count for either one. So, for informational, there's really 8 that the kids have to think about. And literature, there's 9. And when you say, like, character motives, like it's not like the long jargon, it's really easy to internalize.
How does the characters, traits, motivations, and feelings? They just put feelings,
Right.
So then the 4th question, at the end of the story, the old man offers to. So again, it's focusing on the old man, but then offers to kind of hones in on feelings or traits or motivations. Like, why is he doing a certain thing? Why is he offering to do this for them? So it's, again, the same standard. So it's RL 3.3. Mm-hmm. And I would say, just like from a teacher's perspective, if you're seeing this ahead of time, it kind of almost drives your instruction too. You're seeing, okay, these are 2 big standards. that I'm going to be seeing again and again. So I want to make sure that when I'm doing my teaching every day, it's intentional and I'm focusing on those things.
Mm-hmm. Making sure that they really understand that before we take that interim. And then one other thing I might do is say, oh, let's underline this too. At the end of the story, boys and girls, I want to see you go back to the text and look towards the end of the story to find out what this old man is offering, okay? So I want to see your annotations, and when you're taking the test, I want to look around my classroom and see pages flipping. So,
yeah. Question 5 is kind of like go back to the text story. What does the word determined mean in paragraph 9? So obviously we're focusing on determined, and then paragraph 9. So again, the page is flipping. Like we should be going back to the text to reread the sentence that it's specifically in. And so that is RL 3.4.
And in this case, in the literature standard for 3.4, it also, I think, what does it say exactly? It's like unfamiliar words in context, which is the same for informational too, for that standard. We have a question that came in. Jennifer asks, so do you recognize reading the assessments to them during the first couple units? We were told we cannot read to them. Yeah, so in my class, that's what I did. I had a lot of freedom in my class, let me tell you. So I did read the first couple units. I read it all to them, but I, made sure, I told my principal, but I don't know that she heard. But I told my grade level what I was doing. I told my parents what I was doing. I said, these tests that we're taking in the beginning of the year are not going to be, they're practice, basically. They're teaching tools. They're not going to be used for data. So that's why I pulled their screeners from the beginning of the year. We had their guided reading level, like A through Z. We had their Lexile reading level. And then I would just talk to parents too, like honestly, like, okay, when I'm doing my groups with them, this is what I'm noticing. So it's a mix of formal and informal, this not being a factor. So, you could, if it's, I think it's worth it in the beginning to do that, because then afterwards, these aren't cumbersome, these aren't scary, these aren't unuseful. They then become valuable and useful, something that you can use instead of something that the kids are going to struggle with all year long, and then you're wondering, is it that they're not understanding my benchmark teaching, or is it because this is what they're presented with and they never had practice with it? Right.
It's like making it more digestible. So they're able to see, okay, you taught this. I remember, making it like remembering, okay, in class, she was talking about figurative language and making that connection to now this question doesn't seem so scary. Because the word simile, to me, if I'm in 3rd grade, I'm like, oh, I don't remember. But,
Smile?
You're right. Exactly. So then, just making that figurative language connection to where it doesn't seem so scary, I would say.
Yeah. And then I also, a couple times when, if my kids, I had a squirrely class, and I would be like, see, this is why we need to be paying attention, because I promise you're going to be tested on this. And if you just understand and pay attention during the lessons, this is going to be a piece of cake. Let's see. Allison says, I recently discovered the steps to advance assessments. They are on the text for the week and ask more simple questions. Yes. So those are, and that reminds me of something else I want to talk about. Those are great for intervention, right? So they're very simplified questions. I don't know that I would use those for my whole class for their basic, tying it to their report card scores later on in the year, but great for intervention kiddos. Also great for practicing. And this is another thing that I would do with my kids, is I would think okay, I'm looking at these tests and my students are still struggling with part A, part B, or they're still struggling with the choose all that apply, or sequence the events using 1 through 4. Whatever, the format of the question, I could tell when some of those questions were still too tough for the kids. So I would say, let's pull a 2nd grade test. I taught 3rd. So I would go online and I would just print off the tests from the year prior and just put one up on the projector and say, let's practice. Let's spend 10 minutes learning how to answer this question. I'm going to eliminate this one first. I'm going to say, oh, maybe that's an answer choice, but let's come back to that. So it's metacognitive strategies for test taking strategies. So, yeah, that's another thing you can do is print off old assessments. Let's see.
Someone said they've been using, Allison said she's been using those for her lower kids, so that's a good, tiered intervention.
And I know Allison, we've spoken a lot this year about, Allison's my friend, too. I met her in this group years ago. So she's got a tough class this year with a ton of kids, reading around kindergarten, first grade, and she's teaching third. So, Toluca, the test that you created, the Apply It questions, do you think that is acceptable to take for weekly grades? Yeah, so now you can see my motivation, my character motive for creating the Apply It questions. And those are found at the bottom of my Close Reading Companions or as a standalone packet of questions. So now, for me, and this is going to be, you're going to have to...
teacher discretion?
Yeah, that. For me, I wouldn't use those for weekly grades or report card grades. You said weekly grades. I don't think that I gave weekly grades. I just gave the report card grades every quarter. But I wouldn't, because we have already analyzed those texts, those passages together multiple times throughout the week, throughout the unit. So that isn't really, to me, a reflection of what the kids can do on their own. I like that they're reading a really short passage that's a cold read, and that they have to apply these.
Yeah, I think the cold read's important.
Yeah, for that kind of data. The Apply It test questions, I wrote those for this purpose, so that I could show them, look, our close reading purpose was to draw inferences, and we just did a graphic organizer where we drew inferences. Now let's look at what that looks like when it's on a test. And so when I was designing those close reading companions, it took me forever, a whole year, because I would go into the weekly text and look for the question that asked about the lesson that week, and I would say, okay, that's how they worded it. I'm going to write a similar question using the same verbiage, but using our weekly text, so that I could teach this strategy, basically.
So we're going to move on to our informational passage. So again, it's still the second interim, and it's still third grade standards. So we're using the Washington Fires passage, which is the third one. If you're following along, or if you have that, there was a literature, and then informational. So we did the first literature passage, and now we're doing the first informational passage, which in the packet is the third one. So it says, look at the map of the Washington fires. Which city was affected by the fires? So if you're looking at the map, it's kind of also a right there type of a question, because you're just looking at the map. But so it's kind of just reminding your students, go back to the story. The passage was very short. It was one page, and then there was a page of text features. There's a map, and then a picture. So students kind of just have to go back and kind of eliminate the cities. Okay, that one wasn't there. Which one was there? And it's right in the map, but you kind of have to search for it. Even when I was going back to check my work, I didn't see it right away. So that would be RI 3.7.
Graphic features.
Right.
Using graphic features. Yeah, so I would say, oh, look, it says map. What does that remind you of? And they say graphic features. Okay. So that's 3.7.
Mm-hmm. So again, what does the photo, so same standard, but just different text feature this time, tell you that you do not learn from the text. So, in the picture, it's a man, and he's using like a axe. I think they called it a hand axe to break the debris apart. And so just more or less, they didn't talk about that at all in the story. So it's more just looking at the picture and seeing, okay, this is showing me what he's doing or how he's helping the fires.
And we're providing you with that background because, you might not be in this headspace with this in front of you. But as far as like when you're doing this with the kids, like it's just a matter of finding the key words and then connecting it to the standard.
Yeah, so it's overall.
Yeah.
Which paragraph best explains the process used to stop the fires? So again, it's redirecting them back to the text, having them go back into it. The standard that it uses, to me, it seemed a little bit tricky only because when I think about features, I don't necessarily think about paragraph numbers as being one of those features. So it says use text features to show understanding, which is RI 3.5. So it's focusing mostly on the paragraph number, which is part of,
So it's text features. I think that one's I also feel like that's a little bit of a stretch. Like for me, I think that would be more of like just 3.1, asking and answering questions, going back to the text for evidence. But since they're not really going back and pulling the evidence and finding the evidence and the answer choices, they're really just choosing the paragraph. I can kind of see what Benchmark was doing there.
Right.
Yeah.
So I feel like these are very common now, the two parts. So
Part A, Part B.
Right. If you get Part A, then you get Part B. And when I'm teaching, I try to tell my students, you have to really focus on the Part A part, because if you miss the Part A, your evidence for Part B isn't going to be correct. So you'll automatically almost, in a sense, get Part B wrong. So this question has two parts, answer Part A and then Part B. What is the meaning of the word officials as it is used in paragraph 5? So they're having to go back to the text. So I would circle paragraph 5.
Okay, I want to see the pages flipping when you get to that one. I definitely want to see you go back to paragraph 5 and reread for context clues.
Right. So RI 3.4.
And for that one, I would just say context clues in kid-friendly language.
And then Part B, which phrase from paragraph 5 gives a clue to the meaning in Part A? So they're again going back and reading and just making sure.
Finding the clue.
Right. I guess this would be context and this would be more. But
clue.
Oh yeah, look at that. It's already there. We also kept. Oh, of course, why would it work prettily? We also wanted to do question 20, only because it's a choose two, which I think is
tricky for the kids.
Right.
Yeah. So it says the passage says the firestorm affected towns during and after the fires. Choose two effects. I'm going to circle two effects of the firestorm after it ended. Boys and girls, this is underlined. After it ended. That must be important. And in this one, I would say we're going to be choosing two. So what I need you to do, remember our strategy, is go through and read all of the answer choices first. Go back to your text. Cross-reference. Then eliminate the ones that are for sure not the right answer. Narrow it down and make it a little bit easier for you to choose from.
And I think that's a good, just by doing this, you're also teaching those test taking strategies, which I feel like if you don't teach them, then they don't know. But we just think that they do.
Yeah.
So
it's like sad that we need to teach that, but we do.
Right, 100%. I had a conversation about how to use a highlighter because we put that as so many times, and then if you don't teach them how to use it, they're just like, let's just color everywhere. So this would be RI 3.3, which has to do with historical events, and like they're using this as an historical event, so understanding why it happened.
Yeah, and I would say what word in here gives us a clue about, text connections, which is 3.3, and then I'd say, okay, effect. So what is that, boys and girls? Cause and effect. So for RI 3.3, what I teach the kids is it's just text connections, or text structure, right? So you're looking for those, the way that the passage is written. It's either going to be in cause effect, it's going to be in sequential, it's going to be comparative, it's going to be like a historical account, facts, dates, information. So there's not that many options for text structure that we teach the kids. So in this case, it would be easily cause and effect because it says choose two effects. So, yeah.
Oh, Lauren, I would like to know what you do to practice the editing task in the assessment when you get to that part.
Aw, thank you, Told you're the best. Your materials and thank you. So the editing tasks, what I would do actually with my kids, and this is something that I did way before Benchmark, was the big cheese. So I'm a big believer in shared writing. That's how I started my day every day. I combined Star of the Week, Star Student, with a writing task each day. So what that looked like for me was on Friday, we would choose a kid. They'd come up, and then we'd interview the student, our big cheese, and we'd categorize their responses as into adjectives, verbs, and nouns. So then that following week, we wrote about that big cheese a little bit every day. And it's shared writing, meaning that you share the pen, right? So whatever we want to write down, we talk about it as a class. And I'd say, okay, like on Monday, for example, we're going to write our intro. So how are we going to write this intro? Jenna, start it off for us. And then Jenna would give us a sentence. Who can make that better? Oh, I can. Yada, yada. So then the kids are all working together to come up with a sentence. And then when we write it, I make a bunch of mistakes. And I make spelling mistakes, I make grammatical errors, and I make punctuation mistakes. And the kids have to edit before they write it down in their notebook. They have to edit mine up on the big screen, and then I pass out class dollars or whatever your dojo points, whatever your thing is, for every little error that they found. So I was doing editing with my kids every single day in context using what we had just developed together. So in a matter of 10 minutes every morning, we were doing writing strategies, we were doing sentence structure, a lot of speaking and listening because it was verbal first. We did penmanship, we practiced cursive towards the end of the year, spelling, punctuation, and language.
I like how it's like on the fly, so they're having to just, not just copy, because I feel like that's so common to just copy exactly what the teacher is writing.
Yeah.
So them having to think about it.
Yeah,
and
before they write.
Exactly.
Like, oh, wait a second, she didn't indent. If you started writing already and you didn't indent, then you need to erase everything, mister. All right, so that's what I would do for the editing. And so for those editing tasks, I actually never even had to go over those with the kids. That was kind of a easy thing for them. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
They don't have any other questions.
All right.
We hope this helped you. We just, just to see the rationale behind the standards. You should be talking about or naming the standards when you're teaching them. Mm-hmm. And so that way the students are able to say, oh, that's RI 3.3, text feature or text structure. So. Mm-hmm.
And this is my personal version of the I can. You know how for a while principals were like, hey, you need to have all the objectives on the board, and you're like writing it out for the first 30 minutes of the day, and it's like the kids don't even look at that. Right. I don't even know what I just wrote, so no one's saying I can, so it's more of 3.4. There's the, I forgot because it's been a couple years for me. So 3.4, context clues. Yeah. That's it. You don't have to read the whole standard either. You just attach a little thing to it, and then they objective met. Right. They know their objective.
And I feel like it makes it less scary for the students and the teacher.
Yeah.
It's digestible.
Yeah, and it really breaks it down oh, this really is all I am teaching for literature and informational all year long. Right. It's not, once you have a very clear picture of for informational I'm teaching this many things, and literature I'm teaching this many things, that's not that much, and the kids will start to kind of see those things being recycled throughout the year, coming up over and over again, and it's not what is this teacher teaching me today? What is she pulling out of thin air? It's no, we're doing context clues again, because that's one of the very few things you have to learn this year. So
ownership.
Yeah. All right. So let us know if you have any questions, and I will also go through the comments and type out my responses that I gave verbally that we talked about, so that if anyone wants to kind of just read through the comments and see the Cliff Notes, then that will be available.
Yeah, we'll be back in 2 weeks.
Yeah. See you then.
Bye.
Bye.